This is the ground zero for guitar right here. So, most of us when we get started, you learn a couple things, learn a couple chords, maybe simple songs. There's a lot of songs out there that are just a couple chords that can get you started. But if you're really serious and you really want to understand the guitar, understand the fundamentals, this is the starting point right here. This is ground zero. So it's kind of almost, I guess you could say, the boring stuff, but it's also the stuff that when you understand this, you can sort of do the math to figure out all kinds of stuff. So this is where it starts. We'll start with open strings. We want to know the letter names for each string, and it goes like this. You got E, A, D, G, B, and E. The best way to learn probably anything is just by breaking it down into chunks and learning it piece by piece. So the first thing, this is the E string, this is your low E string, and this is your high E string. And the way the strings are numbered is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 being the lowest pitch, 1 being the highest pitch. So there's 6 strings, 2 of them are E. So knowing these 2, you already know a third of the 6. And what I like to tell people is just commit this to your memory, that this is the E string and that's the A string. So you got E, E, and A. You already know half the strings just by E and A. So we got E, A, D, G, B, E. Obviously there's the acronyms people come up with. I hosted a music camp with my buddies that I was in a band with one summer, and we had the kids come up with their own acronym for the string names, and one of the kids said, "Every awesome day gets better every day." So that's, whatever the way is that you need to remember it, it's just something that you got to commit to your memory. It's pretty simple. Basically, you just start at the letter A, and it goes to G, and then it just repeats from there. So if you can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that's the extent of the musical alphabet. Obviously, it's not that simple, but that's the basic framework for getting started. You go A to G, and then once you get to G, it loops back around. Well, in between each one of these letters, you have what's called sharps and flats. So you would go A sharp, so on and so forth, all the way to G sharp, and then it loops back around. Now there's one rule. It's kind of annoying in the beginning because it doesn't really make sense, but this is just how music works. The one rule you need to commit to your memory is that there's no sharps and flats between B and C and E and F. So what that means is, let's start with the A string, the 5th string. All right, so that's A. Then we go A sharp, then B, and then this is where the rule comes into play. Like I said, there's no sharps or flats between B and C and E and F. So once you get to B, there is no B sharp. It just goes straight to C. So you got A sharp, B, C, and then everything continues back like it was before. C sharp, D, D sharp, E. Now we're to the next one. Like I said, no sharps and flats between B and C and E and F. So this is E. There is no E sharp. It just goes to F. All right, so we got A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and like I said, the musical alphabet ends at G, so we made it to G sharp. The next letter is going to be A, and that brings you to the 12th fret. And this is kind of how you can double check yourself to make sure you were getting the letter names right, because once you get to the 12th fret, that's the same. It's called an octave. It's the same note. This is an A, that's an A. So once you get to the 12th fret, whatever the open string that you were on, since this is the A string, when you get to the 12th fret, you should also be to A. So, we go to G, G sharp, A. We know we've done it right. Okay, so that's the A string. Nobody ever taught me to start on the A string, which would have been so simple because that's the first letter of the alphabet. It only makes sense. I learned everything from the E string first, which makes sense too because it's the lowest string. It's kind of the first one looking down. So you got E, and the rule comes into play right away on this. So there is no E sharp, it's just F. So you got E, E sharp. There is no E sharp, it's just F. You got E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp. So G sharp is the end of the alphabet, right? So then now we're back to A sharp, B. B is the rule, right? No sharps or flats between B and C and E and F. So B goes straight to C, then C sharp, D, D sharp, E. All right. So I'm just using sharp every time in between, but flat also works as well. And the way I was explained, at least in the beginning, because there are other applications for this, but basically, sharp is kind of used to explain going up, so if it's like B, C, C sharp, you're going up. Now if you're at D and you're going down, you say flat, it would be D, D flat, C. So let's use G right here. So we got G, G sharp, and then it goes to A, right? So G sharp and A flat, they're the same thing. So you got A flat, okay, or G, G sharp, or A flat, they're the same thing. So that's what's kind of interesting with music is when you're new to it and you hear people talking, you hear A flat, minor, 7, all of this stuff sounds really complicated, but it's really, there's a lot of names for the same things. There's different ways to do the same thing. Not all as complicated as it seems. It's just hashing out this beginning stuff. And once you get over that hump, then communicating and understanding this stuff becomes a whole lot easier. Okay, so real quick side note, half steps and whole steps. It's a way how we communicate like how many spaces we're going to be moving on the fretboard. So you got from here to here, just one space, that's a half step. All right, so when you're moving one space, that's called a half step. When you move 2 spaces, that's a whole step. Okay, when you move 3 spaces, so let's say we start here and we go 1, 2, 3, that's called a minor third. If you go 4 spaces, that's called a major third. Half step, whole step, minor third, major third. Those are like the 4 increments in explaining movement, which is also called intervals, like the space between 2 notes is an interval. Now that we know the E and the A string, it's time to learn octaves. I mentioned that before. An octave is the same letter name, but just a higher or lower pitch, right? So this is an E, that's an E. So this is how I locate octaves. Let's just go right in the middle of the fretboard so it's easy to see. Yeah, this is a A right here. And if you skip a string and you go over whole step, that's an octave. So if you go, that's your first simple way in locating the octave is this distance. So you can do the same thing for the A string. So when you're on the A string, whichever note you're fretting, this is a C right here, you go over a whole step and down one, you're skipping a string. So all of those notes are octaves. They're the same notes, just different pitches. Okay, so once you got octaves down, we want to know major scale and a pentatonic scale to get you started. All right, so we'll start right here in the middle of the fretboard at this note right here, which is also an A. So this is your A string. The 5th fret on the 6th string, that's also the letter A. Okay, so in this major scale, we got 8 notes. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, and that's just a regular basic A major scale. We start with, and this is a great exercise too. What you want to do, your first note is on the 5th fret, but you're going to use your 2nd finger for that first note. And then your 3rd finger, 4th finger, like these fingers are all going to be responsible for each of the frets that they're laying on top of, right? So we got 5th fret, 7th fret, 4th fret, 5th fret, 7th fret, 4th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret. And a lot of us start by practicing just going up in pitch, but it's just as important to practice going down. All right, so as a beginner, the stuff might sound boring and lame, but this is just like the basic building block stuff that gets you started, gets you going. Great exercise. And once you figure that out in one position, you can do that really in any position, starting from that 6th string. So we can do that here. So good little warm-up workout would be to start low and just build it up higher. can keep going. But this is great for keeping your hand in one position and leaving each finger responsible for each fret. Another beginner pointer too, I have my thumb basically meeting my fingers on the back side right here. Certain chords you want to like wrap your hand around, it makes it easier, but if you're trying to really make that contact and you're struggling with that, because you don't really need to press that hard, but if you have this thumb behind here creating that reinforcement, it makes things a lot easier in getting a clearly pronounced note. And then I also have my finger kind of arcing too. It's not like flat. Obviously there are times when you want your finger flat to bar some things, but in the beginning when you're just trying to get these notes, you want to make sure that your finger's arcing, so that way there's space for other notes to be made when you're building chords and things like that. Okay, so you got your major scale, now pentatonic scale. This is like the fun one. This is kind of the more rocky, bluesy kind of stuff. Very basic. I mean, it's almost pointless for me to make a video about this because there's probably a million of these videos with the pentatonic scale on YouTube, but this is your all-in-one stop, getting started with guitar. Let's say you know your string names now, you know your letter names now, you know these rules. You got your major scale down, you know octaves. Now it's time for your pentatonic scale. And the way that this works, we'll also do an A pentatonic scale. This is a minor pentatonic scale. There's also a major one too, but the minor is kind of, this is where we start. So 5th fret, 8th fret, 5th fret, 7th fret, 5th fret, 7th fret, 5th fret, 7th fret, 5th fret, 8th fret, 5th fret, 8th fret. All right. So pentatonic scale gets its name like a pentagon, 5 notes. That's obviously more than 5 notes. What happens is you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's all the notes in the scale. And once you hit this one, the 6th one and the 1st one are the same note. Those are octaves. And so that's where the scale starts over again. But just for mapping out this whole position all the way up and down, that's the way it goes. Right? And what's cool about this one is every 5th fret is one of the notes in the scale. So the only thing that changes is what's happening either on the 8th fret or the 7th fret. All right, so once you get that down, there's a whole universe of pentatonic stuff to expand into, but that's just kind of your first starting point. As a beginner, you want to know that pentatonic scale. Same thing applies for that too as well. Once you figure it out in this position for A, you can do it anywhere else. So a good way to practice that, again, up and down. And then that brings us to chords. That's kind of maybe the hardest part as a beginner, is learning how to shift in between chords, let alone just be able to grip a chord and strum it all the way through and hear each note nice and pronounced. So I want to just start with some easy chords for you. You got an E minor that only takes 2 fingers to make. As a beginner, you kind of tend to want to use your first finger and second finger to do things. So if you put your first finger on the 2nd fret, 5th string, second finger on the 2nd fret, 4th string, and make sure that it's nice and arced so it's not getting in the way of anything else, and you strum that, that's an E minor chord. So that's probably like the easiest way to just jump right into doing an E minor chord, but what I suggest, what's important, there's certain ways to set these chords up so that way you can move to other chords easily. So instead of doing your first finger, let's start with your 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the 5th string, your 3rd finger on the 2nd fret of the 4th string, and so you have your 1st finger and your 4th finger free. So that's a nice E minor chord. And what that allows you to do is this 1st finger here can go now on the 3rd string on the 1st fret, and that gives us an E major chord. Alright, and this was explained to me when I was starting that the difference between major and minor is major sounds happy, if your guitar's in tune, and minor sounds sad. which is like a very simplified way, oversimplified way of explaining the difference between major and minor chords. As you get deeper into it, you kind of can associate certain feelings with different chords, but that's a good way to just, you know, generalize the categories of what these chords sound like. Okay, so if you can do an E major chord, if you have this chord fretted right here, if you move everything just downstairs one string, and you start with this A string right here, this is an A minor chord. And what I'm doing, since this is an A minor chord, I don't really want this low E in there. It doesn't fully ruin the chord because the E is within the harmony of an A chord, but typically, just this is kind of advice for beginners as well, is that, because this isn't always true, sometimes like the deeper you get into it, it's fun to throw in low harmonies, but in the beginning, it's just kind of it's a good rule of thumb, I guess you could say, is if it's an A chord, you want an A in the bass. If it's a G chord, you want a G in the bass. If it's an E chord, you want an E in the bass. So if we go back to E minor, since that was the easy one, we know that this is an E string, right? So that's your lowest note. You got an E in the bass, and then this is a high E, so we can do all 6 strings. That's what's cool about the E chords. Same thing with the E major. I need to tune this thing a little bit. You got an E major and an A minor. And just practice, you know, with the E, you can strum all the strings. And with the A, you're starting from the 5th string and strumming all the way down. So what's cool about those is it's literally the same shape, but you can just go downstairs, upstairs. So that's kind of those are 2 easy chords to switch between. Now, if you want to keep both of them major, because that's like going a major chord to a minor chord, sometimes it sounds cool. It's got its own interesting sound. But another thing that sounds cool is you do E major to A7. So what A7 is, it's also just it's a 2-finger chord, I guess you could call it that. So you got to open A, 5th string's open, 2nd fret, and you're going to use your 2nd finger, and then that's on the 4th string, and then on the 3rd string, that's open, and on the 2nd string, that's 2nd fret, and then that's open. So you got open, 2nd fret, open, 2nd fret, open. I'm trying not to hit the E string. And one thing you can do too, like I kind of do this naturally now, but my thumb is kind of curling over the top and muting the E string. So I can really hit all of the strings, and this E is not really making any noise. It's just those 5 strings. So you can go. So since this is a 2-finger chord, like I said in the beginning, a lot of people want to use their 1st and 2nd finger because they have control over them, but you want to try your best to fret them like the way that's going to make it easiest to transition. And for this, the easiest way to transition is going to be your 2nd finger and your 3rd finger fretting that chord, and then all you have to do is just move those up and then put this one down. Instead of going from here to there, that's a big movement, doing that instead of this to that. Okay, so we got E major, we got E minor, we got A minor, and we got A7. So an A major, the only thing different to make just a regular A major chord, like we had a regular E major chord, is this one also gets fretted. So you have all 3 of these, which this one seemed a little tricky in the beginning because if you have bigger hands, it's kind of a tight squeeze to get all 3 fingers into all the 2nd fret. But it's possible. I got pretty big hands. And can still make it happen. So that's an A major. Okay, so you got A major, you take away the middle finger, that's A7, you switch it like this, that's A minor, Same shape upstairs. That's E major. Take away your first finger. That's E minor. So it's a lot of chords. You can do an E minor. I like doing an E minor to an A7. I got my looper right here. I'll loop those chords. So I got E minor, A7. And then if you know your pentatonic scale, we did the A one, but if you do it for E, 0, 3, 0, 2, 0, 2, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 3. So that's just the tip of the iceberg for beginning to make some music and jam and play guitar. Super fun stuff once you start diving in, and once you get those fundamentals down, and then you start learning little nuggets here and there. It makes it super fun. Yeah, so hopefully that all makes sense and that helps you. Again, this is just the fundamentals, foundation stuff. It's just the stuff you got to commit to your memory. And it seems crazy and impossible, and some of this stuff just seems like it's really unnatural and feels unnatural, and it's really hard to switch between chords. But you give it time, you put it down, you come back to it, give it time, put it down, come back to it, and all of a sudden you're able to do things that you couldn't do before and things that you thought you'd never be able to do before. There's certain chords that were so hard for me to just get under my fingers and fret in the beginning, and now it's just I can do it with my eyes closed. And I don't come from a musical family or even feel like this stuff really comes that natural to me, but I love it, and I know that you sit there and you take the time and really try and figure it out, and something happens and it clicks in your brain one of these days, and it's so rewarding when you do figure it out, and it will click. So just keep plucking away at it, and I hope that helps.